Hey guys, so today we're taking a look at an Aussie-made aluminium extrusion cockpit, the RKS-04 from RaceKraft Simulations. So John from RaceKraft Simulations is a guy that I've been in touch with for quite some time now. He actually reached out to me right back at the start of my sim racing journey when I was having some problems setting up my triple 35-inch monitors and offered me a lot of help. So somebody who I've got a lot of respect for already. So when he reached out and asked me if I would be interested in reviewing one of his cockpits, I of course jumped on the opportunity. So we've had the cockpit here for a couple of weeks now, testing it out, putting it through its paces, and honestly trying to decide whether it's something that I want to buy from him to keep as a test rig, or maybe to give to Tom to use for his sim racing videos, or whether to send it back again when we're done. Now, one of the things that is really impressive about this cockpit is that it came with most of the hard work already done in terms of assembly. So out of the box, it was mostly pre-assembled, only sort of just some of the ancillary stuff needed to be bolted on. And yeah, it was very, very, very simple to put together. And I know that that's something that's going to be important to a lot of people that might be looking at an aluminium extrusion cockpit for the first time. But without further ado, let's get stuck into the assembly, get into the rig, and yeah, give you my thoughts on it. Let's get going. Okay, so before we take a closer look at the cockpit, I just want to comment on the overall assembly experience. Obviously, as you guys saw, it was for the most part pre-assembled. And all in all, including all the fine-tuning and adjustment of placement of various components, took me just a little bit over an hour, and that was including sort of moving the camera around as well. So I think that you could easily get this done in under an hour if you had experience building, and probably allow 1 to 2 hours at most for somebody who's never assembled anything like this before. So it really was very straightforward. And as I commented with the SimLabs P1X cockpit build a little while ago, the overall experience of building it was quite enjoyable, simply because there was no problems with holes not lining up or having to drill or file anything out. Everything just went together exactly the way that you would expect it to, and there was no problems whatsoever. So it made it an enjoyable experience overall. But anyway, let's have a closer look at the cockpit now. Now, RaceKraft do have a couple of different configurations and options available. So what we have in front of us here is the RKS-04, which is constructed of 40x40 as well as 80x40 aluminium extrusion. We'll have a look at that in more detail in just a moment. Now, there is a RKS-03 model available, obviously a little bit more expensive. That comes with 160x40 profile. And we also have an RKS 2.5 option as well, which is constructed of 120x40 profile. So those are, of course, options if you want something a little bit more beefy. But as you'll see throughout the course of this video, this is actually a very, very sturdy rig, and it's impressed me with just how rigid it is. Now, we do also have a couple of different options available for monitor mounts as well. Obviously, what we have here in front of us is the integrated single monitor stand, but there is also a freestanding single monitor as well as an integrated triple and freestanding triple as well. So they've got you covered for pretty much any configuration there, and there are different arms available for the integrated stands depending on what wheelbase you're using and what monitor you're intending to mount as well. So just make sure you do get in touch with them before you place an order, just to make sure that you're going to be getting exactly the right parts. Now, unfortunately, we don't have them here to test out for you, but there are also some additional accessories available too. So we've got a keyboard tray, we've got an extended keyboard tray with a shelf as well, a mouse pad attachment, a PC shelf, as well as a button box and tablet mount. And they do also sell their own Alcantara RaceKraft branded seat as well. Now, just quickly on the subject of seats, what we have here is a Bride Japan, or so it seems, seat. Now, this is actually a replica seat, and what that means is it doesn't comply with any international or Australian standards or anything like that. So I would absolutely never recommend buying one of these to use in your race car or street car or anything like that. But for the context of a simulator, they are pretty good value, and we'll definitely be testing this out pretty heavily over the coming months and seeing how it stands the test of time. Now, this came with its own seat rail as well, as you would have seen in the assembly part of the video, as well as side mounting brackets. Now, these are quite thin and flimsy, but thankfully RaceKraft do also include their own 4mm thick steel side mounts for bucket seats as well. Now, these are extremely sturdy, and as you can see, they've got a whole ton of adjustment on them as well. Let's just quickly have a look at that in a bit more detail here. We can see we've got about 10 centimeters of adjustment in the front, and have a look at the back here quickly as well. About 5 centimeters of adjustment in the rear. So that's plenty for pretty much any bucket seat that I can think of. We also did get a little bag of spares as well, which just comes with a few M8 bolts, a couple of M3 bolts it looks like as well, for various different bits and pieces. I'm not sure exactly where they would go because I haven't seen anything else on the rig that uses those bolts, and a couple of T-nuts as well. Now, while we're on the subject of T-nuts as well, I just wanted to quickly show you these. So very similar to the ones that we saw in the SimLabs cockpit. So it's the spring ball type. And what that means is that they're really, really simple to install. Not that it really matters with this rig, to be honest with you, because we didn't actually need to install a single T-nut for anything to put this together. Obviously, if you're installing accessories and stuff later on, then that's going to become a different issue. But let me just quickly show you how this works for those who might not be familiar. So we'll pop this end cap out quickly. So with the little spring ball, what that means is that the T-nut stays suspended and stays supported inside the rail, so it doesn't move around. So what it means is that you can put it in the position you need, and then it doesn't just slide back down automatically when you turn it up. So that can be really useful, particularly for installing things on side rails. You can imagine if you install it in the side, then you have to be holding it while you install the bolt or the piece of equipment that you're trying to mount. Otherwise, it's just going to drop to the bottom every single time, which can be very frustrating. So nice to see that they're using the good type of spring ball T-nuts there as well. Now, when I review a sim racing cockpit, there's three main things that I'm looking for, and they are adjustability, rigidity, and expandability. So let's start off with rigidity here. I'm sure that's the thing that most people are going to be interested in the most. So we'll jump into the cockpit quickly. Now, obviously, the amount of flex that you experience is going to depend on the length of the shaft between where you're actually gripping the steering wheel and the base plate here. So in my case, It's about 5 millimeters at most, but obviously if it was longer, if the steering wheel was closer to me, it would be more and more and more as you get closer. But yeah, certainly not, and we'll comment on this more when we're driving, but as a first impression, it certainly doesn't appear to be enough that it's really of concern. I don't think it's going to be enough to really lose any major fidelity, but not quite as sturdy as we saw with the SimLabs P1X, particularly once we installed the UM1 mount from SimCore. Now, from what I can tell, the flex seems to be coming from the plate itself, so some sort of a support structure across the bottom here might make it a little bit more rigid and a little bit less flex. You can sort of see it's bending in the middle here rather than flexing from the sides or anything like that. So it should be a relatively easy fix, but obviously anything you do down here to add reinforcement is going to reduce the amount of leg clearance. Now that's not really a problem, at least in my case. I've got heaps of room there, so not really an issue. So that is something I think might be a welcome addition, is some sort of a support structure across the base there. Now I'm told they do also offer front mounted brackets for these rigs as well. So that is another option as well if you're worried about these base plates. But honestly, I don't think it's enough flex to really be concerned about, but just something that I did want to make sure that you guys were aware of. Now, speaking of flex, let's talk a little bit more about the pedals here. So I'm very happy to report that with my V3 pedals here, which are a 90 kilogram load cell with the brake performance kit installed, I'm not sensing any flex there whatsoever. And I'll give you a side-on shot as well so you can see for yourself. But yeah, from a driver's perspective, even pushing on that as hard as I possibly can, so bracing against the back of the seat and really slamming in, I can't get that to move at all. So that's a really, really good sign. And I think part of the reason for that might be that, as we were talking about with the support structure across the bottom of the wheelbase, what we actually do have here is exactly what I was talking about. So we've got this little piece across here which stops any buckling or any flexing inwards or any bending, so to speak. So a really well-designed wheel plate. And as you saw in the construction part of the video, a huge scope of adjustability, both up and down as well as in and out as well. So I don't see this being an issue in terms of adjustment for anybody. I'm just a little bit over 6 foot and was able to get this into the correct position. Now, what I found is that it's a little bit cramped in the footwell area. Now, I am wearing particularly wide shoes right now to kind of demonstrate a worst case scenario. Obviously, with racing boots, it's nowhere near as cramped as this, and there is still plenty of space to move around. But I kind of suggested that a little bit wider a footwell area would probably be a good thing. Now, the other issue that the narrow footprint created was it meant that the support bar or the mounting bar for your shifters and things like that had to be quite short, because otherwise it would bash into the seat. Now, obviously, depending on the width of the seat will depend on whether this is an issue for you or not. But with the particular seat that I have, you can see here, you have a problem with clearance between the mounting bar for the shifter and the seat. And what I said to John is that I think this mount needs to be a little bit further back, because at the moment I kind of have to reach forward. It kind of only comes back to in line with the wheel itself, as you can see there. So that really needed to be a little bit longer, but to extend that, you also need to have a wider footprint so you don't run into issues with bashing into the side of the seat. So I'm happy to say that for all future sales of this particular model, the footprint will be increased by 40 millimeters, which gives us an extra 20 millimeters on either side, which will give us a little bit more clearance for seats. And he's also going to extend this bar a little bit longer as well to give us a little bit more reach for our shifters and handbrakes and other accessories that we might want to mount on the side there. And that really was the only, I guess, complaint that I had with this rig, was just those couple little things, which I'm very happy to say are both resolved by the time you guys buy one of these. So neither of those should be an issue at all. Now, having the uprights for the wheel deck on an angle like this definitely makes getting in and out of the rig a lot easier. One of the concerns I had is that it might reduce the amount of rigidity that we had with the rig, but I'm very happy to say that that has proven to not be an issue at all. We've got 8mm thick steel for our angle brackets here, and 10mm thick for the mount that goes onto the support arm here / mounting rail for our shifters. And with this bar added, there's absolutely no flex in the wheel deck itself whatsoever. The only flex, as you saw before, is just in the actual platform here and sort of buckling in the middle and bending in and out. There's no movement here, there's no twisting, and there's no pulling up and down of these uprights whatsoever. So that doesn't appear to be an issue at all. So very, very happy overall with the rigidity of the design. Now, a couple of other more minor observations, but important to include nonetheless. One thing that I do really appreciate is that all of the hardware is black. Literally the only thing that isn't black is just the T-nuts, which you can only just barely see if you look inside. Anyway, everything else is black, which really does give it a really nice, classy finished result, finished look. You know, it's just little details like that. They don't make a difference in terms of, you know, the quality of the product, so to speak, but you know, it is just a nice touch to have something that looks so finished and so purposeful. Even, you know, just the little angle brackets down there, everything, is completely black, which I really like. One thing that was missing, however, is cable management. Now you can see I've got these little 3D printed clips which I've put in, and I'll actually put a link to the file on Thingiverse for you guys to print these off if you've got 80 by 40 profile that you want to use these with. But I believe he will also be including some cable management solutions in future shipments of these as well. It's something that's easy to include, and I think definitely should be included in a rig of this caliber and this price point. And really the only other thing that I just want to quickly mention before we go for a drive too is the little rubber feet do have quite a bit of squish to them. So what I noticed is when you're moving around, when you're driving, they do have a little bit of wiggle in them. And look, it's not enough. You don't notice it when you're driving at all, but I just want to point out that before we do go for a drive, because you will probably see a little bit of movement in the rig. And I want to make it clear that that is the entire rig moving on those feet rather than flex within the rig itself. So if that's something that bothers you, you can easily remove those feet. Maybe a slightly harder rubber might be a better choice. But again, if you're putting this on carpet, you'd have that amount of movement anyway. But just on a hard floor like this, it is one little thing that I did observe. So I wanted to point that out to you guys as well. So I think that is pretty much all the nitpicking that I can do on this rig. One other thing I should just mention before we do go for a drive is you will probably see a little bit of flex in the monitor while we're driving. Now, this is simply because the vase amount on these Omen monitors that I've been testing out for a couple of months now is not a real great design. You can see there's quite a bit of flex there. So definitely not a monitor that I would recommend for mounting on a fixed rig like this where the screen is part of the overall chassis. Obviously, if it was on a freestanding monitor stand, it wouldn't be an issue at all. But I just wanted to point that out to you as well, just because you might see a little bit of movement in the screen while we're driving. So it's not a fault of the rig by any means. It's simply just down to the design of the vase amount on the monitor itself. So with that said, let's go for a drive. All right, so we'll start off by talking about what I was actually feeling while I was driving, and then I'll sort of transition across to reviewing the footage as I watch it back with you guys. So as I was driving, I felt pretty much no flex whatsoever in the rig. There was a little bit of noticeable flex in the seat, but having a look at that in closer detail, it's actually the back of the seat itself that's flexing rather than the mount on the rig. So that is a reflection on the quality of the seat, not on the quality of the rig at all. So I just want to make sure that's very clear. You can see it when I'm pushing on the brake really hard, the back of the seat's kind of moving back a little bit. So it's just the rigidity of the seat back itself. But the wheel deck, very, very little movement. I can tell you I didn't feel any loss of fidelity at all when compared with what I'm used to with my Simlabs P1X, for example. Regardless of the different wheel mounts that I've tested on that rig, I've never really felt any overall difference in fidelity. And although there was a little bit more flex on this wheel deck when we tested it by pulling on it as hard as we could earlier in the video, I really didn't feel any difference in terms of the fidelity while driving, which was a good indicator. And, you know, watching the footage now as well, you can see there's absolutely minimal flex whatsoever. In fact, I don't think I've actually seen any flex at all so far watching the footage back as I'm talking. Now, onto the pedal deck, no discernible flex there either when I was driving, and looking at the footage, I don't see any movement either. So really happy with that as well. The only movement that I can see is really just the rig swaying side to side a little bit in quick changes of direction, and that is just down to those rubber feet. I can tell you that the entire thing is moving in unison. There's not any issues with the screen swaying independent of the rest of the rig. Any movement that you can see of the screen independently of anything else is simply down to that vase amount that we discussed earlier. The mounting arms themselves aren't moving at all relative to the rest of the rig. So everything is nice and solid, exactly as it should be, and really nothing to pick apart at all. Everything seems to work perfectly. So there you have it, guys. That is the RKS-04 rig from RaceKraft Simulations, as well as the integrated single monitor stand. Now, there were a couple of little things that we suggested back to John that I think needed to be changed about the rig. There are a couple of little details that I thought could be improved. But look, overall, I was very, very impressed with the rig. And I think once we account for those changes which John has made to the rigs that will be shipping out, I really see absolutely no reason not to recommend this rig. Easy to put together, which is a massive plus for those who are new to the Aluminium Extrusion cockpit scene. In terms of all the main things that I look at when I'm reviewing a rig, so adjustability, expandability, and rigidity, none of those things were major red flags for me whatsoever. The only little bit of flex that we had was in the wheel deck, but it really isn't enough to, at least in my experience, in my opinion, take away from the fidelity of the wheel. And it wasn't something that I noticed at all when I was driving. It's only when you actually look back in the footage that you can sort of see a little bit of flex there. And you know, if you really sort of pay attention to it, you can see it, but really not a big deal, and certainly not as much flex as we've seen in the past with some other rigs. So yeah, look, overall, very, very impressed with the rig. And I think with those few little changes that we've made to the design with John, then yeah, there's really nothing to be concerned about at all. So I'll put a link in the description to the RaceKraft Simulations website for you to check out this product. I believe that their online shop is still a couple of weeks away at the time of making this video, but hopefully by the time you're watching this, it'll be there. But if not, it'll be there shortly. But you can jump on the RaceKraft Simulations Facebook page, get in touch with John there, and he will sort you out. And just make sure you do also mention to him exactly what wheelbase and monitor configuration you're going to be running, so he can make sure he sends out the correct parts to you. But hopefully you guys have found this video interesting and useful. If you have, as always, leave a thumbs up. Make sure you are subscribed and hit the notification bell too, so you don't miss future videos. And yeah, it's time for me to get stuck into the DD1 versus DD2 wheelbase review now. So stick around and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.